Welcome to Prime Life. We call it Retirement 2.0. Leave each episode with tips and new ideas to help you navigate retirement in our new age. It's your time. Make it count.
This podcast is for educational purposes only. It is not intended as medical, investment, or financial advice. We do not sponsor or endorse any of the individuals, companies, products, or services featured on this podcast. Any statements or opinions expressed are of the individual who makes them. We hope you enjoy the episode.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Prime Life Podcast. I'm here today with Mary and Laura and a special guest. Excited to be here. How you guys doing?
Doing well.
Excellent.
Yeah, doing well. Excited for today's conversation.
It's going to be great. Mary, without further ado, please make the introduction.
I absolutely will. Today we have our special guest, Kerra Bolton. She's an award-winning journalist, documentary filmmaker, and author. That's quite a bit. Her creative nonfiction work explores identity, memory, and healing, culminating in the early stages of her memoir, Water in My Bones, and documentary film Return of the Black Madonna. It's very intriguing. I'm super excited. Kerra, please share a little bit about yourself and what you're up to.
It's always such a hard question to answer because I'm up to so many things. But I guess what I'm up to is the same thing I'm always up to, which is learning how to swim, dive, map sunken slave ships, document it, write about it, teach about memoir writing. I'll be teaching a course in travel memoir in March. And so I'm up to a lot of things, but that's the thing that lights me up the most.
So I've got to know more, right? Mary gave a wonderful introduction, and it sounds like you have a very interesting background. It's writing, it's filmmaking, it's storytelling, it's diving into, using my own words here. It's the who and the what and the why of the people, the story, the words. And you talk about diving, and you talk about diving ships and telling stories. Tell us more about that, because that's very, very interesting.
Well, one of the things that I noticed is that many people in the African diaspora, particularly the United States and some in Brazil, like we talk about swimming in open water. I live in a small beach community in Mexico. And the first time somebody invited me to go swimming in a cenote, I freaked out because I was just like, I'm not going in there. That's a cave, And what I didn't want to say was, I don't know how to swim. And I noticed that a lot of people don't know how to swim. And I wondered, why is that? And it had to be more than just, I don't want to get my hair wet or it's inconvenient. And so I started diving into it literally. And I started looking at the research and the history. And what I noticed was it was a lot of it's epigenetic. And what I found that the place that really got me was the slave ship, and how, because many people in West African communities were expert swimmers. And then they came on the slave ships to the United States and the Americas, Caribbean, Brazil. And then all of a sudden there was a fear of learning how to swim. And most people will say, oh, it's because of segregated swimming pools and laws that were meant to keep people land-bound. But what I found was that it went farther back than that. And so I wanted to explore that. And it opened up a whole world about ancestry and stories and migration patterns of people, which is why I'm going to Morocco in February for an artist residency to study the trans-Saharan slave trade and its parallels to the transatlantic slave trade. So I'm just being curious, following my interests.
I love that. And curiosity is a common theme on Prime Life. And it's amazing when you ask a question of an individual, once you see as they introduce themselves and you can tell the spark in their eyes and what lights them up. And then you learn more and you hear the depth behind it. It's astonishing. And I think that's one of the things that I enjoy most about this podcast and these conversations we have is really the overarching theme, right? It's longevity. It's living your prime life, whether that's retirement, pre, post, doesn't necessarily matter on the timing there, but understanding who humans are at the core and what we as a society either believes, doesn't believe, knows, does not know, et cetera, is always something that we like to dive into, no pun intended. But, one question for you, and you talked about it, stories.
Mhm.
People sharing stories there's a lot there, right? Where you think of stories in your own lives, of your family, of your friends, et cetera. We can learn a lot from one another. We can share our own stories to inform others or those who yet to come. Can you talk to us a bit more about the work you do with story sharing, storytelling, and why it's important?
Sure. So one of the things I love about this particular project and telling people that I'm learning how to swim at midlife is that everybody has a story to tell. Like they tell me about the first time they learned how to swim, or whether their parents could swim, or how old they were when they first swim, whether they like swimming. And so it's really a great entry point to discover that we have more in common than that differ. And I believe that stories are also an entry point into so many things, because the more we find the particulars of a story, like the one that I'm telling, the more universality I find, and that we have common stories. And what I'm doing is not, it's part of a larger story. It's part of the human story. And for me, it's part of an ancestral story. And I get to connect with other people and other people's ancestors, and it's just, I don't know, it's a really great gift to have in life, is to be able to be connected to so many other people. And then also with, I call myself a narrative strategist. Sometimes I've been hired to use stories to help solve problems. So in the case of restorative practices, if you meet people who there's a conflict in some way, and you look at the story of the conflict, you allow both people to talk and to be heard, and you look at that story and you examine it and you dismantle it, then you find different meanings from the story, and then you also find that healing is possible.
I'm almost speechless from your first introductory remarks. I was like, well, there's a lot to absorb. And now Laura just asked you this big question. You dumped a whole bunch more onto us no, it's great. It's like there's a lot of meat there to pull apart. I just, for our listeners, or some are new, some are old, you mentioned epidemiology, which is an interesting topic, which we covered a while back. I never knew about this study and the research about people of African descent having a fear of learning to swim. I come from a Jewish background, and in our, my beliefs and where I come from, learning to swim is almost a commandment. Like you are required to learn how to swim. So it's just interesting to hear that different perspective. But Water in My Bones, your memoir,
Mm-hmm.
it's a great title. I encourage, and I'm sure we'll put the link to your sites and whatnot in the show notes. I watched your trailers, or whatever the right term is for the videos. I understand why that's the title now. Tell our listeners, why now are you deciding to tell this story, to build on Laura's point, and what does it take to actually start telling that story at this point in your life?
And we'll get that answer after a brief word from our commercial sponsors.
NASA is always working harder to be your carrier of choice. We offer insurance products that can help you meet your retirement goals, such as protecting your savings, securing lifetime income, or paying for healthcare costs. We're dedicated to providing best-in-class service and are keeping things simple, and we'll have your back. We have around 400,000 policyholders and contract holders and have been doing this for a long time, 170 years, but we remain humble enough to always try to improve. For more information, visit nfg.com. NASA insurance products are issued by Nassau Life and Annuity Company of Hartford, Connecticut, Nassau Life Insurance Company, East Greenbush, New York, or Nassau Life Insurance Company of Kansas, Overland Park, Kansas. Subsidiaries of Nassau Financial Group. Products are not available in all areas. Policyholder counts are for all Nassau companies as of September 30th, 2022, and are subject to change.
Well, it didn't start now. I've been working on this since 2019. So it is it is my calling, it is my purpose. But I think to your point of why now, I think that we are so politically and socially divided in this world, and any points of light where we can find that we have more in common, if we can find more bridges together as humans, I think we survive. And not only do we survive, but we thrive with style and compassion. And I'm honored to just be a part of that in some little way.
So you did talk about this sort of midlife, and I want to touch on a couple of things. One, the swimming. My mom's 87. She still can't swim. She could never learn to swim. She took swimming lessons. She couldn't get beyond blowing bubbles in the water. She still talks about that at 87. She's fearful of the water. Won't go into that too much, but that's her story. I think our listeners, and I know I'm very intrigued, midlife, taking a right turn, taking a left turn, really going after what you want to do creatively and also just from a societal standpoint. What was it that clicked for you or pushed you a little bit to just take that leap of faith?
Oh gosh, I felt like I could not do that. And we have, our storm season is usually March through April, or it's September and October. And there was a particular terrible hurricane. And I thought, what if I die in this hurricane? And I just kept crying because I thought, I'll never finish my book. I'll never finish the documentary. And that's the legacy I want to leave. I don't have any children. I don't have an immediate family. I don't have brothers and sisters. And if all I leave is a book and a documentary, then my work is done. And so it was about legacy building is really what I wanted to do.
I love that, the legacy building. And again, it's a conversation we've had, and it's interesting to hear from individuals. Just in the same way that retirement can be defined differently by every human, I think legacy can be viewed individually from every person as well. And, you talk about the memoir, the documentary. And to me, I have not experienced writing or creating either of those things. Talk us through that. I'm unfamiliar with the process, right? One can assume that you put pencil to paper or fingers to keyboard and whatever method that you prefer. But what is that like, both spiritually, and then also, how do you do it?
Well, there's no one answer, unfortunately. So when I teach memoir writing, for example, there are people who come in who they just want to tell a story about their favorite uncle, or they want to write a personal essay about the letters that their parents wrote to each other during World War II. And then I've had other students who, like, there was a serial killer in their family and they wanted to dissect what that looks like. My memoir is speculative memoir, so there's a lot of sort of magical realism in that. And so it requires me to go into a deep place in myself, which is why one of the reasons I'm going to Morocco is because, having that space to just go deep into myself to excavate those memories. It's almost like being on an archaeological dig, because it requires me to be in a different mental space than doing some of the journalism work that I might be better known for. And then directing a film was kind of an accident. Like, I was working for a restorative practices pioneer who hired me to do some work in Detroit. He loved it so much that he was willing to fund a docuseries about it, which I was the producer and in the documentary. And then we talked about, the director and I spoke about my journey to learn how to swim. Long story short, I ended up being the executive producer and director of the documentary. And that's a whole different set of skills. It's visionary, but it's also like being the CEO of a film.
Once again, you said a lot of stuff that's got my brains churning. As you were describing to Laura just now, the reason behind this, it almost sounded like this is therapeutic in some way. Like, the process of doing this is like almost therapy. I know it's not medically therapy, but so that's super interesting. You talked about legacy, your legacy being the book and the documentary. What, sort of the self reason. Are you hoping that this has an impact on other people or motivates people to explore their future, their histories, or what do you hope that this does to the greater population?
Well, whenever I tell my story, people get excited and they want to start doing family history research too. And I really hoping that the listeners examine their family history. And I always say to my students that it's not just like your parents and your grandparents. I mean, like 5 to 7 generations back, because it takes the strain away. Like if people have a difficult relationship with their family of origin, or they don't know their family of origin, it just gives them room to enter. And if people have a particular, I don't want to call it hobby, but thing that they're called to. So like I'm a writer, or if you are a musician, or some other thing, and you can be an economist, looking at the lineage of who inspires you. And that can also be part of your, I don't call it family, but it can also be part of your lineage, your heritage. So it doesn't have to just be genetic. It doesn't have to be your family. Just thinking of it longer term than that. And also, I wanted to say that I went to England to visit my friend AJ's mom, Annette, and she was talking about her husband who had recently passed away. And on his tombstone, it said, "Make the world one family." And that had stayed with me. That was, again, that was in 2019. And that is another part of it, is like making the world one family. How would we act toward each other? Differently, I hope, because some of us don't treat our family very well. But like, if we thought of each other as family, like, how would we treat each other?
It's interesting too. I have an aunt on my maternal and paternal sides of my family, and they go deep into the lineage. I have a box in my attic. Like there is so much history that they've been able to unearth and share and seek through. And it's interesting to me. So when I receive the information, depending on what the story tells of my ancestors, right? We've had an ancestor who was on the Mayflower. We had an ancestor who goes by the name of Emily Dickinson. The other side, Noah Webster, right? So it's like, what does that mean? Like, does that make you feel differently based on what you've learned about people? If they have names that have shown, is there something in your family history or lineage that was unexpected, right? It's interesting points to me where you can choose to make decisions for yourself. And speaking for myself, it was interesting to learn some of those things, because to the curiosity of wanting to know more, like, wow, I didn't realize that. What does that mean? What can we do with that? What do we choose to do with that? And again, kind of telling the story, and in my case, kind of honoring through legacy, right? So Dickinson is a name that several of us have. And, I'll say blessed with it as a middle name. So I had to bless my son with it. My father has it, my aunt has it. It goes all the way up the tree. So I think it's interesting for those people who've had the opportunity to go back up the family tree and go, the branches in the forest might be large, to get an understanding of who's around us and how that shapes us, or maybe it doesn't shape us, and that's okay too. But I love the thought of telling stories. And for holidays, my kids are gifting my mother a book where she's to fill in all of the pieces of information about herself, her parents, her grandparents, to go back as far as possible. Because to your point, I want to know these things. I want them to know these things. And they can use that information as they so choose. But I think story is powerful. I think for me, it's one of the things that I'm called to, is to understand the people around me and to hear different perspectives and to hear story and to learn from it, so we can hopefully make, the world one family in one place. So I appreciate you sharing that story and the writing on the tombstone. I think that's important for us to consider, especially given our current state.
I agree with that, Laura. Kerra, what do you hope that our listeners can be encouraged by your work to perhaps improve, or give them some kind of like impetus for them to dive in, no pun intended, to their creativity and to their resilience?
Well, I haven't spoken about this yet, but there's a lot of discussion, public discussion about multi generational trauma. And I look at it through the lens of swimming. And as I've done my family ancestry research, I noticed the different personalities of my family. And you think about the trauma, but then at some point you have to embrace the joy. And that's ultimately what I want people to get from my creative work, is that I did the work, literally learning to swim, learning to dive, learning all of these things in an age where I should be kicking back somewhere, but I did the work to break the generational trauma so that I could get to the joy, so that the legacy is joy. It's not the trauma. And we need to pass on our joy to our children and grandchildren, not just the trauma.
Storytelling, it's a skill, but many of us lose those skills early in life because we're told as kids, stop making up stories. And so as we get older, a lot of people lose the ability to tell their stories. Are there any, I'm not going to use the word tricks, but suggestions, skills, building activities that you could help others tell their story better?
Besides taking my workshops at Narratively. Take my workshops at Narratively. I teach memoir writing. I sunsetted writing with the ancestors, which sort of connects that. I might resurrect it again, who knows? But in terms of tricks for people, we tell stories all the time. I mean, we talk about what happened during our day. You don't have to have special skills. Just record some of your stories with your phone and hear yourself talk. Keep a journal, sketch if you like to, take photos with your camera phone. Like, it doesn't have to be this involved thing where you need a master's degree to do it. You are a human being. You are wired to tell stories. You could tell a story with a meal. Like, I made mac and cheese for Thanksgiving, and it was a whole story in that mac and cheese.
I love that. And to Joseph's point, I hope one thing that we all can do is to help remind people around us to tell those stories. And to the point of the mac and cheese, right? Everything is a story. Everything can be a story. Now it's, everything is content, but content are stories. So I appreciate this. What I'm hearing a lot of is it's reinvention. It's kind of connectedness. It's weaving together stories, the past, the present. How do we want to resonate? How do we want to inspire? What type of legacy do we want to leave? I guess in the same vein of sharing thoughts and giving people things to consider, does this type of work, or if I want to kind of reinvent how I'm telling my story, is that something that I should expect to be a heavy lift? Or how can I go about even starting this process as I look forward?
As you look forward, I would say start with a journal. It doesn't even have to be a fancy, $30 journal. I would start with a journal or a legal pad and just start writing how you feel each day. And you'll know over time that story changes. And go back and read what you've written. Or, like, if you like to take photographs of the same place and see if those things change. What do you notice that's different? How do you feel that's different? You'll notice an evolution. What stories do you tell yourself now that you didn't tell yourself a year ago? And so observe yourself in a way with compassion and grace, but also be a little bit analytical about it too. I mean, I can say more, but
I think we all are absorbing that for a second there.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. It's doing a lot of thinking. Go ahead.
I was going to ask a kind of a follow-up to that. Everyone's telling stories of your mac and cheese, what have you. Probably a lot of people probably overthink their stories, right? And they're like, oh, I don't have a story to tell, or my story's not good enough to tell. Or, I'm a boring storyteller. You can put whatever words around that. Do you need to have lots of emotion and the ability to express yourself to tell a good story? Or is it simply, like you said, taking a picture every day or writing in your journal every day?
Well, people are telling themselves stories about how they tell stories, right? And so you don't want to do that. That's why I mentioned grace and compassion, because there's so many gatekeepers. And here's another thing, like, the world will tell you who you are, but you get to say who you are. And a lot of people don't know who they are. So sometimes ancestral research and family history stories helps them understand who they are better. So I come from a long line of creatives. My grandfather played drums with Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Patti LaBelle, Johnny Cash. So, my uncle was a painter, my mother was a dancer. So it's like in my blood. But then in my father's side, they were farmers and they lived in the same area and they worked really hard. And I hope I work really hard. So I can see different parts of my personality in my family. And back to like the stories that you tell, I told myself a story that I cannot make mac and cheese for Thanksgiving. And I did. And I remember one point where I didn't think there was enough seasoning in it, because if you know anything about Black people, we love our seasoning. So I dumped a whole bunch more of seasoning in, and I'm looking at it and I'm like, oh my God, I think I have too much seasoning. And then I literally took, like, my hands were clean, but I took my hands and I heard my ancestors say, girl, you need to get in there. So I got in there with my hands and I got into that mac and cheese. Like, there was my grandma in that mac and cheese and everybody loved it. So again, it's the stories that we tell, and it doesn't have to be fancy. And don't listen to the gatekeepers. They have a job, but ignore it.
I love that. I think it's about believing in yourself. Like you said, you have your own story to tell, and forget the gatekeepers. And I really love that message, because I think a lot of times on Prime Life, we talk about, people doing their second act or gaining the confidence, especially as women. I'll genderize a little bit, especially as women. And so I think that message is very powerful. Kerra, I also want to give you an opportunity, because we are going to air this in 2025, early 2025, to talk a little bit about what you're going to be doing in Morocco, so that those that want to get in touch with you regarding that, so we'll give you the opportunity to plug that.
Thank you so much.
Missionary work that you're going to be doing.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. So, as part of reinvesting in myself and my creativity, I applied to the Green Olive Arts Residency in Tétouan, Morocco. And it's basically a month of being able to research the trans-Saharan slave trade, and make those links between that and the transatlantic slave trade. I'll also take some time, much needed time, to work on the book Water in My Bones. I have 2 chapters. Both of them take place in Mexico. One deals with colonialism, and the other is more of a spiritual experience I had in trying to remove the shame of sexual assault from my body, as part of reinventing myself and telling my story. And it takes place by the ocean. So I'll be doing those things. I have an Indiegogo campaign going. I'll be talking to Moroccan storytellers, women, artists, and activists about art and resiliency, because that particular area of Morocco, they had a lot of colonialism happening between the Spanish and the French, and it's a mixture of different cultures. How did they deal with it? How do they deal with it now? There are issues of human trafficking because they're so close to Europe, particularly Spain. So I'll be getting into all of those issues as well. So it's basically a research trip, and I get a chance to delve into my work. And if people are interested in joining the adventure, they can just check me out on Indiegogo or Instagram under Woodbine Ventures, which is the nonprofit that I founded to help Black creatives promote their work and to finance their work as well.
That's amazing. We're definitely going to share all that information in the show notes, and we welcome all the listeners to go there, learn more, and support. So as we wrap up today's episode, we'd like to ask this question. It's usually one of the most profound questions of the show, but it's important to us. And it goes back to a lot of what we've talked about today. But Kerra, you've done a lot. You will do a lot. You're making a great impact in so many ways. Why do you wake up every morning and do this work that you do?
Wow, that is a big question. The simple answer is because I can't not do this work. It's calling. Even in the lowest moments, it's a pleasure to get a chance to be a human being and to contribute to the wellness and healing and connection of other human beings. I can't think of a better gift to be able to have.
That's amazing. We appreciate that, and it's it's our honor and our pleasure to be able to air this story and to help you amplify your message to the world. So to our listeners, thank you so much for joining us here today. We're going to put all the information in the show notes. Again, we welcome you to please go check out the links, support, and continue on with listening to the stories of Prime Life podcast, both in 2024 and into 2025 and beyond. Mary, Kerra, thank you both so much for a great conversation today. And to our listeners, we'll catch you next time on Prime Life Podcast.
Remember to subscribe to the Prime Life Podcast anywhere you find podcasts. You can find all of our episodes, contact information, and more on our website, primelifepodcast.com. Stay connected with us. Follow us on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok.